Would you like to reduce your net fleet fuel spend by 10 to 23%? Could you use that money in other areas in your company while reducing your carbon footprint at the same time? Click the link below and learn more. Hey everybody, welcome to FEI Freight Executive Insights. The freight executive I have today is John McKenna. And John is the Vice President of Operations at BSP Transportation. Is that based in Litchfield, New Hampshire? Is that where you're at?
No, actually, that's my home, but the company is based in Londonderry, New Hampshire, about
Gotcha.
one town away, not far from where Manchester's airport is. The company's been here in this area for, 54, going on 54 years. Originally started right on an airport, a hangar on Londonderry, in Londonderry at the airport. And then we moved into the building we're in now back in the 80s. And
Oh, wow.
It's been around a long time.
It has.
Originally founded strictly, basically, as, I think Mr. Law, when he first started, was doing things like furniture and things like that, and then eventually moved into the air freight business, and has developed over the years to be the preeminent air freight entity for Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. So we service, all three of those states exclusively, every zip code, and so we've had a great reputation as an air freight provider in this market for a long, long time. So much so that, to be honest with you, we haven't had a person in the sales department in, probably 10 years or so. Virtually,
wow.
virtually everything we do from a air freight sales perspective comes from, reputation, and our coverage. We have a fantastic customer service team that stays really in tune with our freight forwarder community, and so we've really been able to continue to service this market purely based on the product we offer and the service we provide and the reputation we have. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Do you have a marketing? I mean, do you market to people? How do you handle new business? I mean, is it seriously just purely like word of mouth, and you're just that good at people just giving you the freight?
We've had, I would say, up until recently, a limited marketing campaign.
Wow.
And we do try to attend the Air Cargo Conference every year to, continue to, put ourselves out there. But we have a small social media following. But recently hired on was the sixth generation of the Law family, Victoria Law, and one of her chief responsibilities is marketing. So we are now sort of developing better marketing for all of the companies that are owned by the Law family, and BSP is one of them. And so Victoria's taken on that role, and our marketing is improving. We're enhancing our website. Our social media is improving. So, we are starting to come up with new methods and maybe more recent successful methods to market the
That's
company.
amazing. What's the competition? Is there a bunch of competition in that area, and you just kick their butts, or? Well,
there was, I would say, for a long time, there was competition. Back in when I first worked at BSP, believe it or not, from 95 to 2000. I went from Carolina in Woburn, and I came up here to BSP in 95 as the terminal manager. And back then, there was more significant competition, at least based in this area, for air freight. One at the time, Land Air of New England was an air freight trucker back then.
That's true. That's right.
And there were some other smaller entities, Lightning Express and New Hampshire Freight and some others who we competed with. But over time, I would say now our biggest air freight competitor from a trucking standpoint are those truckers that are based out of Boston that have begun to expand their footprint into southern New Hampshire. And
Gotcha.
but there aren't really any true competitors in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont that we compete against. Portland Air Freight does do some air freight business, but they're pretty diversified with some other dedicated stuff that I don't think they're quite in the market like they once were.
Yeah, yeah. So Carolina, back in the 80s, you started at Carolina, huh?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, I've stalked you. I stalked you on LinkedIn to find out your history, obviously, and that's where I found you. But yeah, so I was Roadway Express a couple states over in Pennsylvania at that time, right?
Roadway had a great
industry.
Yeah, great. Roadway had a great reputation, and obviously had a great. One of the things that I think they were known for, and what I've encountered in my career, is they had a great training program.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, they got pillaged quite a bit. A lot of people were taken from Roadway. It was a great training program, I think, for a lot of the industry as well, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, I always felt very comfortable hiring people that had Roadway Express on their resume, because I always felt like that they must have had that internal metal to know how to do things the right way because they worked at Roadway.
Yeah.
They
really did. They did really an excellent job. And, a lot of it was, John, was completely a hands-off training, right? I mean, you were given a 13-week manual, and every Friday you needed to check in and take tests and check the click boxes that you went and visited this and did that, and any failure and you were out. So it really fostered, you got to get it done yourself type of attitude.
Yeah, I mean, Carolina's wasn't that robust, but I felt like Carolina gave, certainly in my case, I felt like they gave us a good foundation for how to run a truck line. And I learned a lot from some early mentors in my career on, back then when you didn't have sort of the technological advances you have today. And it was old school, and you kind of had to figure out what trailer to put what door to put the trailer in without sort of the sophistication you get today from the algorithms and the computer programs, right? And you had to learn how to be efficient. And some of the young supervisors that I've trained over the years don't believe me, but when I was at Carolina in the early 80s or the mid 80s, we had one forklift on the dock, and we would do 400 bills on a Sunday night. And so there was a lot of hand unloading back then, and parts, and not much freight was on pallets. And obviously the industry's flipped itself on its side, and everything's on pallets. But back then, there was a lot more hand cart, a lot more two-wheeler work. And today, that's sort of a real anomaly. Dock workers today rarely have to get off the forklift to use a different piece of handling equipment than a forklift. So very different today.
Yeah, but I had I had 5 terminals at one point that I managed. Just had supervisors at the terminals, but I was called a cluster manager at one point. But you're right. I mean, I had 15 driver barns that had one forklift on the dock, and we put out 12 runs, 12 P&D runs, and unload 12 P&D runs every day, and also spot trailers and full loads and stuff like that with one forklift. I mean, it was you're right. You learned efficiency, man, and how to get it done low cost.
Yeah. And at some point in my career at Carolina, we came up with this routing program that was totally zip code based. It wasn't street based, but it was sort of a simple routing system that basically routed trucks it clustered the shipments by zip code, and then you would hang it at the door. And I remember being relatively new in my career, and I would ask the drivers for feedback on how we did loading their truck. And it was a tough group of Teamsters from Local 25, and some of them just wrote a lot of not so nice stuff, but some drivers actually would allow you to get some insight on what was best for them and how to best load their trucks. And I sort of learned my craft by driving around industrial parks and places and wanting to understand how how to be, route efficiently before we had technology to do it. So, that
Yeah.
was sort of how I kind of I wanted to get better at what I did. I wanted to improve efficiency, and I wanted to make it good for my drivers and have them respect me for the work I was putting into trying to get their trucks routed correctly. So,
Yeah. Yeah, back in the day, Mike Wickham was president of Roadway Express, and I remember him telling us that our job was as supervisors as early on in my career, very early on. And he said, I remember his speech at our terminal there, break bulk. He said that the supervisor's job was to make the job of the Teamster as easy as possible on that dock, or if they're drivers, right? I mean, that's what helped the company the best, make it the most efficient P&D route, the most efficient cross dock that you possibly could. That was your job. And he was right. And it's interesting though, John, I came up to uh, Chattanooga years later. And I was Roadway Express up in Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania area. But later on in my career, I came to Chattanooga, and we had 200 door dock, cross dock, in a niche commodity, floor covering, and the power went out, and the computer system went down. And the dock stopped, and I was running the terminal. I came out there and I looked at my operations manager. I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Well, we have the computers are out. We can't move freight." I said, "You get 100 people on this dock, and those are bill of ladings, and those are trucks. Why move the freight?" And I mean, they were dumbfounded that they could move freight without a computer. It's amazing. It's amazing with all the efficiencies, how you forget or don't know those little things that we learned, growing up when we did in the industry. It's very
yeah,
interesting.
I remember like in the morning having to line up the bills for the truck to get loaded when it was time, when we were sort of done
Oh,
stripping,
yeah,
and
you had
now
to print out all the way bills and put them up with the trucks. Yeah.
right. And today, everything is so computer generated that, we're of course now we're paperless on the dock, but back then you would line the bills up and assign them to a dock worker or somebody to load the truck, and you'd have to like tell them what order you wanted them in. And now, and I wasn't always right in the order, but I thought I was right at least, and I put an effort into being right. But now you have the technological advances that just route the trucks for you through whatever routing system you're using, and it's a lot different. But back
Yeah.
then we had to know a lot more than and we were a lot less dependent on technology than they are today.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So what's going on in your neck of the woods these days, John? I mean, in your vertical, you're in the air freight business now, right? The ground transfer of air freight. Are you
But
looking at the impacts of the port on your air freight? Is there you think there's going to be more there, or you guys think you're going to just ride through this? Or I mean, if it lasts long enough, I would imagine there'd be some type of implication in your vertical.
um, true. So I should point out that 85% of BSP's business is cartage business.
Okay.
So we are a cartage carrier for 6 national carriers, and we use that cartage business sort of to put us in position to be able to service air freight and provide a good service for our cartage partners who don't necessarily have visibility or terminal networks in the 3 states that we service.
Gotcha.
So
Okay, brilliant. Nice.
so yeah.
That's a great explanation of your system. I got it.
Yeah. So what I've seen is we have some really large air freight accounts that I think were aware of the potential for the strike, and what we've seen is some. One of them, for example, a big account for us is LL Bean, and we've noticed that they started diverting some shipments some time ago to air freight that previously would have been on an ocean container.
Gotcha.
Because we also service LCL, so we do some ocean business, and I do anticipate that we'll be impacted a little bit with that for a period of time with the strike. I would imagine we'll see a little bit of an uptick in air freight on some of maybe the larger shipments that are a little more time critical, but it's, difficult to understand how that plays out, because I don't know if there's any panic yet in the industry because it's only been a day or two, right? I think if this starts to get to be drawn out and it's a couple of weeks, I could see it sort of energizing the air freight industry for a period of time,
Mm-hmm.
as people become a little more impatient that maybe what they thought was going to make a container and get to the States in November, December, maybe isn't going to make it. So now they have to start looking at alternatives and start flying things.
Gotcha.
And so, we'll obviously keep a close eye on that and hope that we can capture some of that opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great assessment. I mean, it's only day two, right? But as you hear the rhetoric coming out from the union side of thing, from the longshoreman side of thing, it sounds like they're prepared to hunker down for the long haul and make something happen. So hopefully it does get resolved. But right now the rhetoric doesn't make anybody hopeful. I don't think. Do you?
Yeah, and I feel like I've heard the union president talk a couple times this week, and yeah, he seems like he's pretty serious. I mean,
Seems old school to me, dude. I heard that talk back in the 80s too. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
it seems like we went backwards about 40 years.
yeah. What they're asking for seems a little unrealistic to me. That with the average American, the problem they're going to have is what they're asking for: 11% a year over 7 years, 70% pay increase. Who wouldn't want that? But I mean, for the average American consumer to hear that on the news and think to themselves, that they're pretty pleased if they get a 3.5% or 4% raise, but these guys want 11% a year. I'm not sure they're going to get sort of as many people rallying around them, hoping that they prevail. But no doubt, if this gets drawn out for a couple of weeks, I feel like it could be there's a side of me feels like it could be a good thing if it goes a couple of weeks, because it may energize the economy a little bit once it gets going again, once it gets resolved. It's going to cause that sort of short-term panic to get all those ships unloaded and those containers moving and people's goods to them in town.
Yeah, I see the same thing, and the impact, or I'm thinking the same way you are, John, and the impact on capacity and truckload pricing and stuff like that. I get asked, what do you think the impact is going to be? And I think, people are looking at disruption in trucking and freight and movement. And in my opinion, I see it being a downward pressure on rates in the beginning, especially on the eastern region, because now you've got all this capacity, has got nothing to do. And so they've got to keep those trucks moving and generating revenue. So I think there's at least it kills any rate increases in this region at the minimum. But the impact, if it goes a few weeks, is don't have enough capacity to handle the flood of containers and freight that's going to be coming through those ports. I heard there's like 35 container or ships backed up right now or something like that.
Yeah, and a friend of mine was asking me about whether they would divert to California, but I explained to him that California's got such strict carb regulations on trucks that I don't think they have the capacity to move all that goods out of the West Coast if they diverted, because when California signed that legislation a couple of years ago, they really struggled to get the containers needed. I can't imagine with their strict guidelines that you're going to have a lot of truckers wanting to go into California unless they're driving newer equipment that meets the California carb standards. So
well, the BCOs, that's a pretty big gamble for the BCOs, because it's not like you can just say, well, go to California and you get it there in a day or two, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the strike could be over by the time the ship gets there.
Right. You're absolutely right about that. But that's when somebody asked me, I thought, I don't see that being a really good solution.
Are there northern ports north of you on the St. Lawrence or anything like that would be able to be diversion for some of those northern ports, like there in Maine and along the Boston coast?
I don't think so. I mean, there's a port here in Boston that was has been more active in the last couple of years than it was in a long time. They dredged the harbor and made capacity bigger, and that's been helpful. But I would say the only, probably the next closest port that I would think could handle ships would be maybe Montreal. I don't think there's anything else on I don't think that I would imagine that the longshoremen out of Portland, Maine would be in the same union. So I would think.
Oh, yeah, no, I knew that in Maine they would be, but I figured, up in Canada there might be something along the St. Lawrence or something.
Yeah, I would think Montreal would be the only port that potentially could be considered.
Yeah, gotcha. Interesting stuff, John. I really appreciate you coming on and your insights of what's going on there, and I love the history and talking to a fellow freight dog from back in the 80s is always interesting, right? Those of us who actually had diesel forklifts.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's not hard. I was going to say it's hard to find sort of dinosaurs like myself that started off on a freight dock back before technology and have sort of emerged into the new wave of things, and some of the caliber of supervisors you have today, they're very dependent on technology. And the example you gave about the computers going out, I'd be fearful on how many people could meet that challenge today if a terminal didn't have power. Like, would they have the ability to sort of still get some of the work done without sort of the hand holding that is required from the computer systems?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, but it's no fault of their own, and they're quite efficient, and the technology is fantastic. And I looking back, I'd kill to have this technology back.
Oh, I agree. It continues to get better and better, and I think it's really good for our industry. And I don't know where AI plays a role, but I'd imagine at some point AI could even play a role in some LTL markets and help us get better at what we do. But
oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, you talk about the routing by zip code, et cetera. You keep pounding routing guides through AI, and eventually you're gonna have some really good routing information to be able to, to grasp that efficiency out of those, because there's always something interesting going on. And I think the ability to throw that technology at the myriad of changes to your P&D routes that happens just throughout the day, right? I mean, you got a perfect plan and it goes to hell in a handbasket by, 10 o'clock in the morning. You're covering things. So that type of technology would have been absolutely awesome to have to work that instead of Magnedex cards, right? Where you're moving stuff, moving stuff around.
The old key card dispatch and two-way radio dispatch, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No tablets back then. You got on the radio and you tried to raise the driver on his radio and tell him you had a pickup or whatever. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Excellent stuff, John. I really appreciate it. Best of luck to you and best of luck to BSP. And if there's, anybody out there in the New England area in your business that isn't already a loyal customer of yours, where do they go to find you and give you all their freight?
www.bsptrans.com.
There you go, brother. I appreciate it, John. Thank you so much, my friend. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate you having me on.
Right on. Peace.
Yeah.